And what if your life could be divided in two? Like one me that only exists at work and another me that only exists outside of it. That is exactly what happens with Mark Scout, the protagonist of Severance. He seems like just another normal guy, an office worker living by the book. But the truth is that his life is a psychological madness. The original Mark, the outie, is in the middle of crushing grief, drowning in loneliness. The work Mark, the innie, knows absolutely nothing about his suffering. It is the dream of escaping problems only transformed into a nightmare. In this video, we are going to dive into the mind of this man with two lives that do not speak to each other. We are going to understand why he agreed to this separation and why his real life is so much closer to ours than we imagine. If you think your battle is only against the annoying boss or the tight deadline, you have not seen anything yet. Get ready, because today we are going to discover that Mark's true war is against himself. Hit play and come unravel the secrets of Lumen. If you are a fan of cinema, psychology, and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any video. From what place in the world are you watching this video right now? Leave your answer in the comments. Mark Scout is that type of character who, at first glance, seems too ordinary, almost invisible. He is the typical coworker who goes unnoticed in the hallway but carries within him a silent storm. Outside Lumen, he is a man broken by grief, trying to move on after the death of his wife. Inside the company, in any mode, he is almost a newborn, someone who learns to exist in a space where there is no past or future. It seems simple, but this duality is what gives him an almost philosophical weight. Imagine living two parallel lives and never having full control of either one. That is how Mark exists. The outie trying to escape the pain of loss, and the innie trying to understand who he is inside. The four walls of Lumen. In each scene, we notice how his identity is in pieces, as if it were a puzzle without the lid of the box. This lack of control is what makes him so human, because who has never felt that life slips through their hands? The most curious thing is that, while many characters seek power, recognition, or revenge, Mark only seems to seek a minimum of peace. He does not want great achievements. He only wants to survive the weight of the emptiness he carries. And here comes something fascinating. Sometimes the greatest fight is not against the world out there, but against the silence inside us. With each lost look from Mark, the series rubs this in our face. Inside Lumen, Mark is not a boss, nor a star, nor a natural rebel. He is, initially, just another obedient piece of the corporate game. But that detail is exactly what connects us to him, who has never felt like part of a machine that they do not really understand. Adult life often looks like this, completing tasks without knowing exactly why, just to keep the wheel turning. Mark is the representation of this taken to the extreme, but there is a delicious irony in the way he is built. The more he tries to hide from his own pain in the outie, the more his innie starts to awaken uncomfortable questions. It is as if his own mind were trying to sabotage his escape strategy. This internal conflict makes Mark a walking metaphor. We may try to put pain in a drawer, but it always finds a way to seep back in. Another detail is the way he moves between vulnerability and resistance. In outie mode, we see an apathetic man, kind of anesthetized. In innie mode, a more curious Mark appears, with flashes of courage and even humor. This difference is so striking that it almost feels like two distinct people, but in reality, it is just one mind trying to deal with trauma in different ways. And here lies an interesting point. Mark is not just a character, he is a mirror of our fear of facing grief, of our way of avoiding painful memories, and of the desire to switch off an internal button just not to feel. Who has never wished, even for a second, to turn off pain like turning off the light in a room. That is exactly what Severance does for him, but with consequences that go far beyond what he imagines. What makes Mark so captivating is that, even without trying to be a hero, he is dragged into this journey of self-discovery. Life corners him, forcing him to look inward even when he tries to look anywhere else. That is when the story begins to take shape. The ordinary man who unintentionally becomes a key piece of something much greater. And it is in this turning point that the true conflict of his path begins to reveal itself. Mark's conflict is like an open wound that never heals. On one side, the outie is consumed by the pain of losing his wife and finds in Lumen a way to escape this emptiness. On the other side, the innie awakens without knowing who he is, living a limited existence surrounded by absurd rules and with no right to memory. It is a suspended life, as if he were a character trapped in a loop he does not know how to break. This duality generates an uncomfortable question. What is better, to face pain or simply switch off? The problem is that severance is not a solution. It is an escape disguised as routine. Mark thinks that by entering Lumen he can escape suffering, but the truth is that he only fragments his identity even more. It is like trying to sweep dirt under the rug. Sooner or later, it shows up. Inside Lumen, the conflict becomes even more intense because Mark is not alone. He deals with colleagues who also live this broken reality, each with their own fears and emptiness. This transforms the workplace into a microcosm of collective suffering, but also of a search for meaning. And here is the point. His individual pain begins to mix with the collective pain. The great shock is realizing that Mark's innie does not agree with his outie. While the one outside wants to forget, the one inside wants to discover. It is almost poetic because it shows that the human mind does not accept being silenced forever. Memory, even when hidden, finds a way to knock on the door and demand presence. This clash between the two sides is the engine of the story. But it is not just about loss, it is about identity. Mark needs to face the fact that he is not only an obedient employee, nor just a broken widower. He is a sum of these versions that, together, reveal something greater. This existential crisis is like looking in the mirror and not recognizing the reflected face. Who has never gone through a moment like that where you ask yourself, who am I really? The conflict is also crossed by an almost conspiratorial tone. Lumen hides secrets, manipulates memories, and controls the narrative of who its employees are. Mark, who initially only wanted to survive, ends up pulled into the center of this mystery. It is like when you walk into a room just to rest, and without realizing it, you are in the middle of a fire. There is no way out unscathed. The most fascinating thing is that this conflict is not only Mark's, it is universal. Who has never wanted to turn off a part of life that hurts too much? Who has never dreamed of creating an alternate me just to face the day-to-day? The series takes this fantasy to the limit, showing how tempting it can be, but also how dangerous. After all, if you cut off pain, you also cut off the chance to grow. It is at this point that Mark becomes the center of a journey he never asked for, but can no longer avoid. His conflict is a brutal reminder that running from pain solves nothing. It only divides it into larger pieces. And while he tries to understand this fragmented reality, other ghosts begin to emerge, bringing to the surface even deeper traumas that shape his personality. Mark's grief is a constant shadow that seems to whisper in every scene. He does not scream, he does not explode, but it is there, silent and heavy, shaping his every decision. Losing someone we love transforms our perception of ourselves, and Mark is proof of that. He tries to move forward, but the pain insists on reminding him that certain absences never have a substitute. It is that kind of wound that heals on the outside, but remains open on the inside. In the outside, grief manifests itself as apathy, disinterest in daily life, and an almost automatic distancing from people. Mark avoids talking, avoids feeling, and even avoids looking at memories that connect him with her. It is curious to observe how the human mind creates survival strategies. Sometimes closing off is the way not to shatter even more. And yet, this method of protection comes at a high cost. The innie side reveals another aspect of grief, confusion, and disorientation. He does not fully understand what he feels, because everything is filtered through rigid rules and memory manipulation. It is as if he were trying to put together a puzzle with pieces from another game. This internal conflict shows that grief is not linear, that it spreads in unexpected ways and insists on haunting us even when we think we have forgotten. The loss of his wife also ignites a kind of silent guilt. Mark questions himself about things he did or did not do, small memories that turn into persistent ghosts. It is impressive how the human mind can turn banal moments into existential torments. Every step he takes is burdened with this sense of responsibility for his own pain and for the pain of absence. In more subtle scenes, we notice that grief shapes the way he relates to others. The distance he keeps is not only self-protection, it is also fear of repeating the pain of getting attached and losing again. Who has never felt this fear of opening up to someone just for fear of suffering once more? It is a universal issue, and the series shows this in an almost cruel but incredibly honest way. Despite everything, grief also awakens something important: awareness and empathy. Pain teaches Mark to observe, to notice nuances that others ignore. He learns to feel the world more deeply, even if it is painful. And here, the narrative gives a touch of beauty. His personal tragedy is also a lens that reveals human aspects that often go unnoticed. Grief, then, is not only suffering, but hidden strength. It pushes him toward difficult decisions, to question systems, to face realities that others would accept without thinking. It is a silent fuel that keeps him moving, even when everything seems meaningless. The most interesting thing is how this connects with the next challenge, something that arises directly from the impact of this grief. And it is exactly at this point that Mark's grief intertwines with other deeper conflicts, setting the stage for the exploration of internal traumas that he has not yet faced. The pain for his wife is not just the past. It is a lens through which all future choices and fears will be filtered. And as he navigates through this pain, other layers of his mind begin to emerge. Inside Lumen, Mark faces something that goes beyond grief. Existence itself is questioned. He is not just an employee, he is an innie, a controlled version of himself, limited and monitored. Imagine looking in the mirror and seeing someone who looks like you, but who cannot decide anything. This fragmented reality creates a silent crisis, where every action is measured and every thought monitored. The crisis manifests itself in constant doubts about who he really is. It is a distressing feeling, almost as if the mind were divided into two different programs. One side wants to fit in and survive. The other wants to rebel and discover the truth. This internal clash creates constant tension, showing that identity is not only what we feel, but also what the environment forces us to be. Mark realizes that blind obedience comes at a price, losing his own essence. Every task, every routine imposed by Lumen reinforces this feeling of alienation. It is as if he were living a borrowed life without the right to memory or choice. And this perception slowly corrodes his confidence as he struggles to maintain a minimal sense of autonomy. The most interesting thing is that this crisis is not only psychological, it is also practical. It affects relationships with colleagues, decision-making, and even the way he moves at work. Mark constantly feels out of place, like a puzzle piece that does not fit anywhere. And it is exactly this feeling of displacement that begins to trigger the need for drastic changes. This fragmentation of identity also creates moments of moral conflict. He needs to choose between following absurd rules or acting according to his conscience. Each decision becomes a test of who he really wants to be. It is almost as if Lumen were a real-time ethics lab, forcing Mark to confront his deepest values. In parallel, the identity crisis amplifies feelings of isolation. He finds himself surrounded by people who cannot share the truth about themselves, making every connection superficial and fleeting. Loneliness becomes both a barrier and a mirror, reflecting his doubts and amplifying his search for meaning. It is in this isolation that the first flashes of self-awareness begin to appear. In the end, this identity crisis is what prepares Mark for greater challenges. He begins to understand that discovering who he is not a matter of defeating the company or breaking rules, but of facing his own mind. Each step, each doubt, each fragment of lost memory is an opportunity for reconstruction. And it is exactly this reconstruction that connects him to the next conflict, deeper and more personal. Thus, Lumen is not just a workplace, it is a distorted mirror of Mark's psyche. He is forced to face that his life cannot be controlled only by external rules. There is also an internal, silent battle that dictates his choices and behaviors. And while he tries to understand this fragmented identity, other traumas begin to emerge, ready to challenge his perception even more. Lumen is not just a company, it is a true laboratory of the human mind. Each action, each rule, and each observation has a clear purpose: to shape Mark and the other employees as if they were clay in the hands of an invisible sculptor. It is frightening to realize that power lies not only in force, but in subtlety, in the ability to make someone question their own reality without noticing. Mark feels this constantly, even without knowing it. Small instructions, glances, and external decisions become silent weapons that control his behavior. It is like living in a theater where he is not the author of the script, only the actor who needs to memorize lines and gestures. This manipulation undermines his confidence in himself and casts doubt on every choice, no matter how small. The cruelest effect is psychological. Mark begins to doubt his own thoughts, memories, and feelings. Every time he tries to understand what is real, he finds invisible barriers that make him question everything. It is as if someone had placed a distorted lens on his mind, and every step toward clarity requires almost Herculean effort. In addition, the manipulation creates a constant sense of paranoia. He watches colleagues, tries to decipher intentions, and wonders if he can trust even himself. It is a form of control that transcends any traditional hierarchy. It is not about orders. It is about conditioning the mind to accept limits and rules without challenge. Mark feels firsthand how psychological manipulation can be more intense than any physical threat. This pressure also forces Mark to develop internal vigilance, a kind of emotional radar. He begins to analyze each feeling, each reaction, trying to decipher whether it is authentic or just the result of Luhmann's programming. It is a silent battle, but extremely exhausting, that reveals how psychological control can corrode individual freedom, even invisibly. The most fascinating thing is that this manipulation, as cruel as it is, also creates opportunities for self-knowledge. Each obstacle, each doubt, and each pressure reveals limits and internal strengths he did not know. It is a paradox. The more Luhmann tries to control him, the more Mark is forced to confront his own essence and question what really matters. Little by little, we realize that manipulation is not only external, it becomes internal. Mark begins to internalize rules and expectations as if they were his own, and this creates a cycle of self-obedience that is hard to break. It is a warning for all of us. When we blindly accept external patterns, we can lose contact with our own identity without realizing it. And it is precisely at this point that Luhmann's manipulation connects with other internal conflicts of Mark. The pain of loss, the identity crisis, and now psychological control intertwine, creating fertile ground for unexpected decisions, moral dilemmas, and confrontations that will test not only his mind, but his very notion of freedom. Mark's loneliness is almost tangible, as if he carried an invisible wall around himself. Even surrounded by colleagues, he feels he cannot truly connect. This barrier is not only social, it is emotional, the result of grief, Luhmann's manipulation, and his own internal struggle. It is the kind of isolation that corrodes slowly, without fuss, but leaves deep marks. Isolation makes every interaction seem measured and cautious. Mark learns to observe more than to speak, two-way words as if they were rare coins. It is a protection mechanism. If he does not expose himself, he does not get hurt. But the price is high because it creates a constant sense of alienation, as if he were living among people who will never truly see him. This loneliness also amplifies the perception of injustice and oppression. When no one understands what goes on inside you, every absurd rule from Luhmann seems even more suffocating. Mark feels firsthand the weight of being misunderstood, a feeling that often connects us with our own human frustration, in work, family, or relationships. Curiously, isolation also awakens resilience. Mark develops observation, reflection, and introspection skills that no one else would have the chance to learn. He becomes attentive to details, strategies, and nuances that go unnoticed by those distracted by the superficial. Loneliness, in this sense, works as an internal laboratory of self-discovery. But it is not only about growing, it is also about feeling. Emotional distance makes small gestures of care or attention from colleagues become almost miraculous moments. It is a reminder that human connection, even minimal, has a huge impact on those who are isolated. Mark learns to value subtle signs like someone who discovers treasures in unexpected places. Loneliness, however, increases psychological tension. He has to deal with repetitive thoughts, doubts, and internal questions without anyone to share them with. It is like being trapped in an infinite echo of his own mind, where every reflection can turn into torment. This experience shows how emotional isolation is as challenging as any external conflict. In addition, Mark's loneliness reveals a paradox. The more he closes himself off, the more the series forces him to face his emotions. He is forced to deal with fears and insecurities that under normal circumstances could be ignored. It is at this point that we learn with him, isolation can hurt, but it can also be a silent invitation to self-understanding. And it is exactly this loneliness that sets the stage for Mark's last great conflict. A challenge that combines grief, fragmented identity, manipulation, and isolation in a final test of courage and perception. His journey does not end here. It only deepens, revealing layers that have not yet been fully explored. The turning point of Mark's trajectory is when he realizes that he can no longer run from the truth. Grief, manipulation, isolation, and fragmented identity cannot be ignored. He needs to confront reality as it is, even if it hurts. It is that moment when we understand that life does not give shortcuts to deal with what really matters. Facing the truth means looking inside and admitting weaknesses, mistakes, and fears. Mark understands that there is no magic solution or absolute control. Every decision, no matter how small, carries weight. He learns that choosing, even without guarantees, is the only way to regain some sense of autonomy and freedom. The greater challenge is balancing reason and emotion. Mark needs to decide between following imposed rules or acting according to his conscience. This tension is intense because each choice can alter the fate of others around him. The lesson is clear: taking responsibility is never simple, but it is essential to grow and reconnect with oneself. Each difficult decision also reveals courage. Mark discovers strengths he did not even know he had, and this discovery does not come without pain. It is as if facing the truth burned away old masks and allowed a more authentic version of himself to emerge. What seemed impossible becomes learning, and learning generates transformation. This process forces him to deal with losses and frustrations head-on. He realizes that he cannot control the past nor erase the pain, but he can choose how to react. This realization changes the game. Suffering ceases to be a burden that paralyzes and becomes a guide that teaches him to make decisions with awareness. Facing the truth also means accepting risks. Mark needs to step out of his comfort zone, challenge systems, and often question everything he has learned to accept as certain. This silent courage is a form of resistance and an opportunity to redefine his own story, showing that change begins from within. The most fascinating thing is that these decisions are not isolated. They reverberate in every aspect of his life. Each choice connects grief, identity, manipulation, and loneliness, showing that internal conflicts cannot be solved separately. It is a reminder that human complexity requires facing several layers at once, even when it is painful. And it is at this point that Mark finally transforms into something greater than a survivor. He becomes someone who understands his value, recognizes his emotions, and perceives the importance of taking responsibility. But this transformation does not end here, because now it is time to reflect on what his story teaches us and how we can apply these lessons in our own lives. Mark Scout teaches us that pain is part of life, but it does not need to paralyze us. Grief, loneliness, and the challenges he faces are dramatic exaggerations of our own everyday experience. Each obstacle he overcomes reminds us that facing suffering is a form of self-discovery, even when it seems impossible or unfair. He also shows that identity is fluid and must constantly be questioned. Just like Mark, we often feel fragmented, living different roles to please others or escape inner pain. The series invites us to look within and accept that authenticity requires courage, reflection, and sometimes confrontation with our own mind. Another powerful lesson is about manipulation and control, whether external or internal. Mark reveals that allowing others to define our reality can make us vulnerable, but recognizing this influence gives us power. It is a reminder that questioning rules, patterns, and external expectations is essential to maintain our emotional and mental freedom. Mark's loneliness teaches us the importance of introspection and resilience. Spending time with oneself, reflecting and understanding deep emotions can be painful, but it also strengthens. He shows that isolation, even when undesired, can be transformative, making us more conscious, attentive, and prepared to face future challenges. The difficult decisions he faces are another central point. Mark reminds us that taking responsibility and making choices, even without guarantees, is fundamental to grow. Avoiding decisions or running from the truth only prolongs the pain. He teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. The character also shows that self-knowledge does not come without conflict. Each trauma, each moment of doubt, and each challenge he faces are opportunities for learning. He shows that facing uncomfortable truths is essential to understand who we are and to consciously rebuild our own story. In addition, Mark inspires us to value small human connections. Even amid isolation, simple gestures of empathy or attention have a profound impact. He teaches that sometimes strength is not in great deeds, but in the ability to feel and connect, even with small doses of humanity around. Finally, Mark's story is an invitation to look at our own lives with honesty. His conflicts, pains, and choices are exaggerations of reality, but they reflect universal issues: grief, identity, loneliness, manipulation, and courage. And as we observe his journey, we realize that facing these layers within ourselves is what allows us to grow and evolve. And so, what did you think of Mark Scout's journey? All these conflicts, grief, identity crisis, manipulation, and loneliness show us that facing our own mind is often the greatest challenge of life. Which of these aspects did you identify with most? Tell us in the comments and let me know. Which character do you want me to analyze in the next video on the channel? Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications so you don't miss any deep analysis of the minds of these characters who teach us so much about ourselves